Okay, so we've talked about the family, and that's one of the things people find controversial about you. I think really, though, the one that you didn't mention is the race and IQ stuff. This is something you dive into a lot, and I think people think that there is somehow a racist element to it. So I don't want to put any words in your mouth. So do you want to make your basic argument around race and IQ? Can you sort of?
Absolutely not. No. Listen, I'll be very clear about this, because it's like saying, do you want to make your argument that the sun is the center of the solar system? It's like, well, it's not a personal thing. Like, this is not an idea I have come up with.
Okay, so not your idea.
It's not like my formulation, like I've got some beautiful mind set of like charts and lines in my basement. It's like, it's all about the price of magnesium, man, you know? I mean, so
I'm glad you countered with that, because in a way my question accidentally was almost a setup. So I'll take that.
I'm going to give a very, very brief history of what it is, and for those who don't know, where the science is. And I'm not a scientist, so people verify all of this. I've got a whole list of interviews with subject matter experts on the show about this topic. So listen to the experts. This is my amateur summation, just for those who want to know. So the U.S. Army, for over 100 years, has been giving more or less IQ tests to people to figure out whether they're sort of officer material or, grunt material, so to speak. And what they noticed was between blacks and whites, and this becomes this bichromatic nonsense, because the question of ethnicity and IQ is a whole layer cake. Just very briefly, the very top, the Ashkenazi Jews, this is the Jews that are the wandering Jews, so to speak. The Ashkenazi Jews.
You're sitting across from an Ashkenazi Jew. Can you feel the IQ?
I actually am trying to hoover up some language skills from you. I'll do it later with a straw. But
I've been dumbing it down for you. So
I know, and I appreciate that.
As
a Caucasian, I really need to go slow.
Yeah.
I love lots of subtitles. Hand puppets help as well. So Ashkenazi Jews, as you know, and the science is like 115 IQ on average, but lower on spatial reasoning and higher, like even higher than 115 IQ on verbal stuff, right? I mean, verbal acuity among Ashkenazi Jews is through the roof, and it's the highest recorded that there is. Some of how this fits with our general experience, I mean, what we're talking about, everybody kind of knows deep down. It's just that we don't have the scientific language or the mathematical language to describe it, and that's what we're trying to do. So, there's not a lot of famous Jewish architects or engineers, because Jews test an average around the hundreds in spatial reasoning, but crazy high on verbal acuity, verbal reasoning. So, of course, you would expect among novelists, among playwrights, among lawyers, where high verbal IQ is very important, going to find a lot of Ashkenazi Jews. And lo and behold, you do. So what that means is that, let's say Ashkenazi Jews, sort of 120, 125 verbal IQ, and there's a certain proportion of them in the language field, but it's not anything to do with Judaism, it's to do with IQ. And so what that means is that if you look at any group of people wherein they're in that IQ, they're going to be equally represented or proportioned. And then under that you have, I don't know, the word Orientals kind of come out of favor, which is kind of annoying in a way, because how do you differentiate people from India, people from East Asians, whatever, the Chinese, Japanese, and so on. 103, 104, 105 IQ in general, very high on spatial reasoning, which is why, software engineers, other kinds of engineers, you see that, like Google has this, it's like 40% or something like that of their engineers are
not
East
much
Asian.
more, because after this diversity thing goes through, they're going to just have to pick everybody by color and all that nonsense.
But this is the thing, right? So if you're looking at East Asians with very high spatial IQ, they're going to be, quote, overrepresented in those engineering fields and so on, but not because everyone who's got that IQ is up there. There just happen to be more of those, right? You've got your run-of-the-mill vanilla Caucasians coming in at 100. And 100 is just, I don't know, it's just the baseline. They recalibrate it from time to time and so on. And then below, some of this, what are mestizos or Hispanics sometimes called, although that's a very loosey-goosey term, and that's sort of 85, 90, and so on. And then you've got blacks in North America, particularly African Americans, coming in at 85, and there's been some upward drift a little bit. And then below that, you start to get sub-Saharan blacks at 70. There are pygmies in the high 50s, low 60s. There are the indigenous people of Australia, I think, in the low 60s. And some of these numbers, again, I don't have them all tattooed on my wrist or anything. But so there is this range. It is unbelievably heartbreaking I mean, I'm straight up about all of this. Like, this is one of the most difficult facts I've ever had to absorb in my life. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of iterations as a thinker. I was a Christian and a socialist and all. I mean, I'm going to go through a whole journey. But I found almost nothing harder to absorb than this question of differences in IQ between groups. And this goes back many, many decades. This was talked about by Herrnstein in Murray, of course, in the bell curve in 94. And nobody's been able to overturn that. And their basic argument is to say, look, blacks make less money than Ashkenazi Jews. But if you normalize by IQ, they don't. And this is, again, it's heartbreaking stuff, and it is so difficult to absorb this into your daily thinking. Because, go ahead.
Well, I just want to pause you for a second, because it's interesting you're describing it as heartbreaking and struggle, because that's what I was going to ask you, is that because you do talk about this stuff, I was going to ask you, are you troubled by it?
It's horrible.
Because I don't know that I've gotten that exactly through your videos, but I obviously haven't seen everything that you've done on this. So hearing you frame it in that way is actually different than a bit of the impression I had of you on this.
Oh, do you know how much I would give, Dave, to know that it was just racism? Because that's a solvable problem. And people have been working on trying to solve the problem of racism, well, for hundreds of years. I mean, it is, I mean, I wouldn't say I give my left arm because I'm left-handed, but I would give a lot.
Lefty too.
I would give so much for it to just be racism. So if you look at criminality, right? I mean, as you know, black males are, young black males, 3 to 4% of the American population responsible for more than 50% of the homicides. You look at what goes on in the South Side Chicago. It's horrible. And yet, in general, it is not, if you normalize by IQ, everybody who has an IQ of 85 has similar levels of criminality. Whites in America have a certain particular level of homicide that's pretty low, and whites around the whole world have the same level of homicide. Whites in England, whites in Belgium, whites in America, all have the same level of homicide. And the question, of course, is environment versus genetics. Mm-hmm. I would love to have a clear answer to that. Science is making its way forward, but it's such a volatile topic that a lot of scientists, would rather do anything than delve into this particular topic. But it's extraordinarily heartbreaking, and it means to me that no amount of screams of racism can be guaranteed to solve the problem. And I think, isn't that what we've seen? That the consciousness about race and racism has gone up so enormously. And good, because there was definite racism in the world. Mm-hmm. But without this central fact, and it is a fact at the moment, even if we say it's 100% environmental, it's still a fact at the moment. Even if we say,
But is there evidence that it's genetic? Yes. I'm not a geneticist.
Yes.
So genetic in what regard? I mean, if we took the brain of a 25-year-old black man and the brain of a 25-year-old white man, what is it that they're doing that...
They're different sizes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this is dependent on every ethnicity, the higher IQ. In general, there's lots of exceptions and so on. There are different sizes. There is evidence that if you take a white kid from a middle-class household, for whatever reason, ends up being raised by a black family, the white kid's going to end up about 100 IQ. If you take the average black kid, have them raised by an upper-class middle white family or a Jewish family and so on, they're going to end up at about 85. So it does not appear to be strongly environmental. I don't believe that there's no environmental causes. I've done lots of videos where I strongly urge the black community to breastfeed longer, to not hit their children, to do things that will give their kids the best shot at having higher IQs, because that's going to make a huge amount of difference in American society. And this is something that people need to talk about more, is the quality in black parenting, quality of black parenting around the world. But where in America the most could possibly be done is still quite low. They hit their kids the most, and if that can be improved, I mean, who knows what could change.
How far do you go down the rabbit hole of where all that starts? You know what I mean? That most black people in America, their ancestors were brought here as slaves,
Sure.
that they didn't have equality for many hundreds of years, all of this.
Yeah.
And then end up in poorer neighborhoods, then they get stuck on the welfare system, and of course we're painting with sort of broad brushes here, of course. But that is the environmental factor, right?
Yes, and there's nobody who says, no sane person who says any human characteristic is 100% genetic. But again, and I would love to, I'm very keen on improving, particularly childhoods. That's where I think the big thing is. But, a couple of hundred years ago in Europe, people were like a foot shorter than they are now. And that was not genetics, that was environment. Not enough vitamin D, not enough nutrition as a whole, and backbreaking labor and starting in childhood and so on. And so even if we were to say it's 100% environmental, these are the issues that we have right now. So let's say that I could have been 7 feet tall, but I didn't get enough food as a kid. Okay, so that was environmental, but I'm still not 7 feet tall at the moment. Maybe my kids, it could be different and so on. But nobody knows how to improve it at the moment. That's the challenge. You get this Head Start program. What do they pour? $100 billion into trying to close the black-white achievement gap, and with no effect. A few little bits at the beginning, and then it all generally tends to fade away. So it is something that it's a very difficult, unpleasant, challenging phenomenon when we have different IQs, and we haven't even talked about male-female, which again is a whole other challenge to sort of absorb and understand. But and it's funny because the left is always complaining about, and I'm neither left nor right, but the left is always saying anti-science, people are anti-science and so on. This is science. IQ is a very, very good measure. It's one of the few metrics in the social sciences that is, measurable, empirical. It's predictable, right? If people's IQ was wildly different from where they ended up in life, then it would be less valid. But it's very close. It's a very close correlation to where people end up, and nobody knows how to change disparate IQs.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you do in your videos that I really like is you often offer your audience a chance to educate you, and you say, send me links, send me some information that might change my opinion on this. So I think what we'll do for this episode is we're going to find a couple articles about this. We'll find something on the brain size, we'll find something on Ashkenazi Jews and all of this stuff, and we'll put it down below, and hopefully we can get some of the conversation going on this. Because I think it's just one of those things that it wades everyone into dangerous territory, and especially these days when everyone's accused of racism endlessly, even if you're trying to find answers to hard questions. And I think I think both of us know we can actually learn a little something from our audience. So when I watch you do these videos, and I just watched your Syria video that you did the other day, and you said to people something to the effect of, don't just give me your crazy theory. Like, it's not a theory. I want a link. I want a paper and some science. So,
and I've had the subject matter experts on my show, the geneticists and the social scientists. I've had people who believe that it's almost exclusively environmental on to make the case. I've had people who believe that there's some strong genetic elements and so on. So I am, it would be, if I could, there are very few theories that would be absolutely fantastic for me to find disproven, because I've got a lot invested in my belief system, as everyone does. But boy, if somebody could come along with a way to say, it can be solved through this, or this is the cause, or whatever it is, right? That would be fantastic. But right now, the problem, of course, is, and people say to me a lot, and this came up in a conversation, I think, between Sam Harris and Charles Murray. Charles Murray was on his show talking about this. Well, why do you even want to bring this up? Isn't this just going to fuel racists? And isn't this, it's like, well, first of all, it's an important fact, and we are tortured as a society by group differences. I think that's fairly. Don't you?
We endlessly talk about group differences.
Well, they are real, and they're tragic. When you look at the average net income of Ashkenazi Jews and you compare it to blacks, it's worlds apart, and it's horrible. Because if it is just attitude, if it is just racism, that's horrible and needs to be resolved. On the other hand, if it is to some degree genetic, or for whatever reason it is what it is, like let's say that there's a group of Irish people didn't get enough to eat and they've ended up being 4.5 feet tall, well, they're not going to make it in the NBA. Now we can say, well, maybe they're kids and so on, but saying the NBA is prejudiced against these short Irish people for no reason whatsoever would be crazy. We would then scream.
I always thought the NBA was prejudiced against Ashkenazi Jews, but here we are.
Although you know the history of Jews in basketball, right?
I know.
You guys got it going, right?
Yeah, what are you going to do? So, look, that's what I'd rather be doing for a career. So.
After the show.
Yeah.
But the other concern as well, and maybe this comes out of being a parent and so on, and I did weigh, I read the bell curve way back in the day, and I did weigh before. I don't just get up and do shows like, hey man, inspiration strike. I did sort of weigh the pros and cons. The issue is that if the IQ differences are significantly genetic, it's a tragedy, but it's no one's fault. I actually think that if you think, let's say that you think that blacks are exactly the same as Ashkenazi Jews, and the question is why are the blacks failing relative to Jews? You could say racism. You could say there's something dysfunctional in the black culture. You could say whatever, right? It's rap music. But all of those involve negative judgments about groups, right? So either, Jews and whites and East Asians and Hispanics are just horribly racist. Well, that's a terrible negative judgment to make about entire groups of society. Mm-hmm. Or you say, well, there's something wrong with the black community because, you've got these guys from what was it? I think it's in Nigeria or something. The blacks come over from Nigeria. They have a higher per capita income than whites in America. So if it's just racism, physically they're indistinguishable from American blacks. A lot of them speak fluent English. So if it's just, or, like the great Dr. Tom Sowell, who recently retired, wonderful guy. And
I'm interviewing him in January, I think.
Oh, you got him?
Yeah, we're going up to Stanford and doing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you hire Dog the Bounty Hunter to get this guy? Because we
did a lot of legwork for the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. Hi, you might recognize me from the closet earlier. I'd really like to interview you.
That's why I pulled every favor known to man.
Good. No, I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that. So, he did well, and nobody's sitting there saying, So, if there is a genetic element involved, or something which is kind of hardened even through environment, that's what we have to work with, then saying either somehow there's something wrong with the black community or everyone else is completely racist involves dumping massively negative judgments on entire communities, which if there are genetics involved or other environmental factors that we don't as yet know or can control for, it's incredibly bigoted either against the black community or everyone else for things that are beyond all of our control. And that to me is, I don't want people looking down at the black community. I don't want everyone saying that we have this magic answer called racism that explains everything, because it doesn't. It doesn't. And, it's different in a way because...
Why do you think you're so passionate about this topic particularly? Because I was even thinking when I listened to Charles Murray on Sam's podcast, and I thought it was a great conversation, and obviously as they're doing it, you can feel they're wading into things that it's uncomfortable to talk about, as we're doing right now. But I noticed that immediately after the usual cast of characters and Salon, I think, and all the usual nonsense websites, again, just pouring on the accusations of racism, and now Sam's a white extremist or whatever the nonsense is. So I think a lot of people just view this as just the opportunity cost on this is just too high to even wade into it. But you obviously don't.
This is going to sound self-serving. I'm aware of this ahead of time, but I'm going to be straight up with you, man. I want to solve problems in society. I want to fix things in society, and I don't. For the life of me, I cannot understand how we fix things by ignoring facts. Fundamentally, I cannot understand how we're going to ignore things, how we're going to solve anything by ignoring facts. Maybe there is a fix. Maybe there is something that can be done. I'm sure there is something that can be done. But if we don't even acknowledge the problem, how are we going to solve anything? And I really, I find that the plight of, and it's not just the black community, but the plight of communities around the world and in the Western countries is dire. And we are currently tearing ourselves apart as a society, looking for the scapegoats for these group differences. And the science is very clear at the moment about what the problem is. We don't know, again, all of the causes and so on, but I'm sure we could find it pretty quickly. But if we are going to self-destruct as a society if we continue to have this incredible witch hunt for racism and sexism and all kinds, like if we're just looking in the wrong place and we're going to tear ourselves apart. Because this is not like the difference between the world being flat and the world being round. It's not like the difference is the sun or the earth, the center of the solar system. You can be a farmer either way. But if this is like our big thing and we are screaming and turning over stones and screaming racism and destroying people's lives and massive government programs designed to fix everything and propagandizing children that their entire history and tearing down statues, everyone's a racist. If it's wrong, we are destroying ourselves through ignorance. And that, for the society that we have and the information technology that we have and the communications ability we have, for us to self-destruct through ignorance of scientific facts is unprecedented in human history. The Roman Empire didn't collapse because they thought the world was flat. But if we look at what's going on in Europe and population displacements and movement and so on, if we don't understand the basic science behind what is going on, it matters. It really matters about where society is going to go. Because if we ignore facts, it's like you got some weird lump on your body and, I'm not going to see a doctor, I'm going to walk it off, I'm sure it's going to be fine, I'll switch to decaf, everything. Yeah. I'll never switch to decaf,
Turmeric,
by the way.
I think, is the answer to everything.
Yeah. It's some oil.
Yeah.
But if you ignore reality, reality just wipes you out. And so I am very passionate about it because, other things too, I'm a father. I don't want my daughter growing up with everyone screaming racist at her. And they're going to, unless we try and figure out what the facts are.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I can feel the passion coming out of you when you talk about it. And it's just interesting because I see so many people try to wade into this. And then eventually they just are like, I can't do it. I don't want to deal with the blowback. But you've put your position out there, and I'm happy to discuss this again, in a couple months, and we can.
Well, and again, people, if you can prove me wrong, I am beyond thrilled. I will apologize to everyone. Although, again, having had all the experts on, I'm on firm ground. Again, I'm no scientist, but I've had the scientists on.
Yeah. Well, it's a good segue to your book, The Art of the Argument: Western Civilization's Last Stand. Now, I had Douglas Murray on. Are you familiar with Douglas?
Oh, yeah.
So I had Douglas on about 2 months ago, and his book is called The Strange Death of Europe.
Yeah.
So you're both sort of talking about the same thing, but at first what you're talking about here is that we don't even know how to argue properly. We don't even know how to have conversations properly. It's a good jump off of exactly what you just ended with.
Very well negotiated, very well navigated with it. Yeah.
How about that, huh? We almost know what we're doing around here, right? What do we do to strengthen, the basic premise of this, what do we do to strengthen our arguments?
We're always going to have disagreements. And the question is, how are we going to resolve them? And there's really only two ways. We reason or we use force. The only two ways that things get done, things get dealt with. We either, the two of us, if we say, well, we want to go to a particular restaurant, we have to submit to where that restaurant is and go in that direction,
Right.
We have to have some way that we subjugate our will to power. And the traditional way in the West, post-Socratic, with a few large breaks in between, and we may be in one of them right now, I think we are, has been, okay, if I make a better, more rational argument, if my argument is rational and sound and the premises and blah, blah, and the empirical evidence supports me, you agree that we're both submitting to this third party called reality, truth, reason, evidence, right? And that way, you and I can meet in reality, and we can both subjugate our will to power according to an objective standard. Scientists do it, mathematicians do it, engineers do it all the time. There's a third party called reality, objectivity, scientific method, whatever, right? And we have lost that third standard. The third standard, or the objective standard, used to be religious texts. For a long time, under Catholicism, it was what the priest said, what the Pope said, that was infallible. Martin Luther comes along with the printing press and it all collapses into the Reformation and religious war, and eventually you get a separation of church and state. But if we don't have that third party to adjudicate our disputes, we end up with you and I battling each other like two pieces of paper being pushed together. We can't, one of us is going to have to buckle under on another one. And that's where you get all this bullying, this escalation, this pulling fire alarms, throwing fake blood at people and hitting people with bike locks and so on. You get that when people aren't able to find this objective third party to subjugate their will to power, their will to dominance for. And if we lose that, we lose everything.
Yeah, so it seems to me that right now everyone knows we've cordoned ourselves off these days, and because of social media, you only follow news sources that cater to way on. But if we can't agree on basic facts, right, which really is what you're talking about, we can only do the dance of logic and reason and really arguing your point if we can agree on some basic principles.
Yeah.
We seem to be veering into territory right now where we can't agree on that. You think there's a way to correct that? Before we get to, it's the stuff before the argument.
I had a caller in to my show recently. It's a black guy called into the show. We had a great conversation, and he was saying that there's lots of people in his community who genuinely believe that Mike Brown was shot execution style in the back by a racist cop. And he wasn't, right?
Yeah.
Spoiler, right? He wasn't. Yeah. It's very well established.
This has been debunked many times.
And so if there are groups who have these beliefs, and there are other groups who have more accurate or empirical beliefs, people have to submit their preferences to objectivity. That's, I mean, I'm a universalist. This is the philosophy gig, right? You have to come up with universals that people are willing to submit to. Because, you know, the old thing, nature to be controlled must be obeyed. You don't get, and if you just make up your own standards of gravity, you're not going to get very far. But we do have to passionately commit ourselves to submission. Because right now, I don't know if you've ever had this in your life. I've had people in my life where I didn't want to submit to them because it felt like a personal loss, you know, like a personal,
we've all got egos,
you know, I want you're going to win, and I don't, and when I sort of relax and say, okay, well, I have these positions, but they're based on reason and evidence, and I don't lose if somebody teaches me something better, I win, right? I mean, if you go in the wrong way and you stop someone and say, oh, you got to go the other way, you don't say, you're contradicting me, you bastard. You say, well, good, now I get to go where I want to go. But we have to have those objective standards. And back to where we started, Dave, we have atheists who are not, I think, focusing as hard as they could on bringing forward these objective standards. Atheists, again, should be all over the race and IQ stuff because that's science as far as we know it at the moment. But they don't, and I think social conflicts escalate thereby.
Yeah, so if we can't agree on the facts, but we can make, then isn't there like this really crazy, it's almost as if society is going to split in two in a weird way.
Two?
People, or it'll split a gajillion ways, but I think
that's like saying the Death Star at the end of Star Wars just had a change of direction. You know, that's where we go, right?
Are you a Star Wars guy?
I am.
We could do Star Wars.
I bought the album when I was a kid.
The original LP?
No, the original LP. You have it?
I have it in the green room there. I found the original LP on the streets of New York City. I bought it for $3 like 10 years ago.
Wow.
It's the original 1977 LP.
That was my one.
And the poster that I have in there next to the makeup thing is the poster that came in it, which I didn't know I had until about a year ago when I moved. And it fell out of the thing.
Yeah, I listened to that and loved it because this is back before VCRs and all this kind of stuff, and that was the only way you could enjoy it was to close your eyes and imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, what I would have given for a lightsaber.
Well,
I've got a
lightsaber too.
No, but it's not one that can take down a telephone pole, so you know.
I'm working on that. All right, wait. We could do Star Wars all day, but just going back. That the real rift here, yes, there's going to be a rift of like 1,000 different cracks, and we're all going to go in different directions. But that the rift will be the people that want to have an argument, whether they agree or not. Yeah. So we could probably sit here for the rest of the day and find 10 things we disagree on, but we'd do it civilly and we'd, if you made a point, I'd concede it, and I think you do the same thing and all that. So we'll have that set of people, but then we're going to have the larger set of people that just can't agree, on the facts. So it's like, we'll have this good faith group that's going to be doing. It's going to be a small group, but intellectually powerful and rigorous. But then everyone else that unfortunately just can't even get out of that world. So it's sort of like we have to give these people a bit of a lifeboat or something. I think that's sort of why we both do.
Well, this is like this book. I mean, I'm hugely influenced, of course, by Socrates. And what does Socrates do? He didn't take a PhD, sit in an ivory tower, and talk about the ethics of the Babylonians, right? I mean, Socrates went down into the marketplace and talked to people about what mattered to them. There's a reason I do a call-in show for like 3 or 4 hours a week, because I want to talk to people and find out how philosophy can help them and what they're struggling with and what matters to them.
And right at the beginning of the book, by the way, you mentioned, you say that basically this isn't some academic paper that's just like some flimsy nonsense, because we see this now all the time. These academic papers that get peer reviewed, and they're the most ridiculous.
It Peterson you just had on, Jordan Peterson? He was saying that 80% of papers in social sciences never get cited once. Not once. The library has to buy them, they stick them in a shelf somewhere, and
kind of makes me wish I went into academia.
No, it doesn't. I know it does, but no, it doesn't. That kind of futility, right? That Shadowlands thing. You ever see the movie Shadowlands?
No.
Well, it's a great bit. It's a fantastic movie, but Anthony Hopkins playing an academic is talking to some other one, and he says, "Don't you ever get this feeling of ultimate futility?" And I was like, "Well, of course."
Yeah.
But no, I wanted to write a colloquial book on. Well, first of all, you have to tell people why it's important, because everyone has this negative view of arguments. Like, what do you think of? You think of some bickering couple, like, oh man, I remember this popped into my head just now. Many years ago, I worked, after high school, I wanted to save money to go to college. And I worked gold panning, prospecting, like all this really rough stuff, up north stuff. And I remember staying in it's a bit of a rude story, but I remember staying in a lodge and hearing this horrible old married Bickerton couple screaming at each other. And it got to the point where like the man was like, yeah, well, your sister gives better blowjobs than you. And I was like, oh, I'd rather be in the woods. Like, I'll take a bear over this kind of human. And we think of this like, this Bickerton stuff, this maneuvering. You see this online all the time. People won't give up their positions. They inflame, they ad hominem, all this kind of stuff. And so I wanted to give people a more positive flavor of arguments, a more positive flavor of debate, that it's a chance to be informed, it's a chance to learn, it's a chance to sharpen your skills in verbal debate. And that is civilization. Civilization starts, we put down the club and we use our words.
It's all we've got.
Yeah, I mean, there's no plan C. There's a club, there's your words, and that's it. There's nothing else. We've got no backup plan. There's no plan C. That's it. That's all we have. And when you see aggression and coercion escalating in society, which we see online bullying and aggression and all that, we see with the expanding state trying to solve every conceivable problem we have in the known universe, because the state is coercion. It's an agency of force. And that's because force rushes in where words fail to tread. And this is why, okay, I'll talk about controversial issues, because I know that the alternative is, if I back off and you back off and other people back off from controversial issues, it's not like, well, everyone just said, okay, well, we're not going to deal with them at all. What happens is then people who are sophists and the violence mongers, they come in instead, and they start telling everyone what to do at the point of a gun, and that's not good.
Yeah, and that's really exactly why I wanted to return the favor and have you on my show and not just do your show, because whether every argument you made here was perfect, and as you said, you're not a scientist and you're open to those challenges, that this is the only thing that's going to get us out of this craziness. So if I'm afraid of taking some heat for having you on, or if you're afraid of having some heat for having Peterson on, or whatever it is, and I don't even mean you in this case so specifically, but any of these people, if we all get afraid of talking to each other, then it's really, the jig is up.
The only thing I'm afraid of about having Jordan Peterson on my show is that I'm going to look like an idiot. Because the man is so supernaturally intelligent, I'm basically just holding his train daintily and
I believe that the top comment on my interview with him from last week was, "Dave, you're an idiot." So there.
You have to have, some humility to be around that. It's like,
listen, it was a pleasure talking to you. I hope we'll do this again, because there's obviously so much more that we can get into. All right, for more on Stefan, you can find him right here on YouTube. It's youtube.com/freedomainradio.